In this video, we're going to explore the range of yellows. How much can we get in terms of dark, light, warm, cool, all in this somewhat compressed range of yellows. Got a Reaper miniature here, sort of a shaman type figure. And I thought this was really perfect. You can see we've got some feathers here with bright yellow. The cape, more gray down, more subdued, more brown. This is another type of yellow here. This is sort of a mixed with a little bit of white to almost make it somewhat chalky. So we have some high intensity yellows. We have over here kind of an amber type of a gemstone on the end of the staff. I even have, you can see, some leaves here that I've scattered around on the base. And I'll paint some of these too. So that all of these different surfaces give us a chance to really kind of get to know yellows. Got a figure here. This time it's separate on a little dowel rod with a pin because we wanted to work on the base. As you can see, the dowel rod makes it relatively easy to handle. So let's get to our colors. This is the kind of deepest dark that we're going to use. It's from Reaper. It's called Brown Liner. It's a high intensity pigment, but it's not quite as thick and viscous as normal paints. It's not as watery as an ink or a wash, but it has some of that intensity. And we move on into some of the Vallejos, some leather brown, earth and khaki. So that's kind of what we'll be doing in some of these more subdued areas. And then in the brighter yellows, got I think a rucksack tan here from Privateer Press, a deep yellow from Vallejo, an ice yellow, and an ivory. Definitely want to stay away from pure white, especially with things like yellows and reds. At least this has a tiny bit of a yellow in it, a little hint of off-white. And last but not least, again for a little more, see, this is going to shift it more towards the red. We have some vomit brown over here. When we do the glazing, there's going to be some other shades that we're going to introduce, but we'll cover that in the glazing section. So we've got our miniature covered. Talked about some of the paint. Now I'll discuss the palette and the brushes that we'll use. I have the brushes arranged on the palette in 3 primary groups. First one I'll discuss are these. These are filberts. Come in a variety of sizes. About number 2 is the smallest. There's a 4. This is a 6. I think about 8 is as big as I would go. I generally work between 4 and 6. And as you can see, a large flat surface to work with, but with this tapered edge like this makes it nice for doing some blending. And also, one last little feature, see that chisel edge. It makes it really kind of an all-purpose brush. You can put down big layers of paint, do some blending, but with this chisel edge it lets you do that much more. This is probably one of the more economical of the filberts. This is American Painter. You can find this at most art and hobby stores. You can even get these online. Definitely a reasonable price. Now these are very reasonable priced. These are craft brushes, number 8 rounds. And I've got the original package here to show you. See, there's 10 of these in a pack. Very nice price essentially 50 cents a brush. And when they're new, see they have a fairly nice tip on these. Lasts longer than you would think. But even once they've kind of passed their prime and they're more abused and kind of chopped up like this, they're still very usable, because you can use these on a base to really jam your paint in these really rough areas, which would be murder on your good brushes. So essentially, why do that to your good brushes when you have some distressed brushes like this, I'm sure, laying around. This leads us to our last group of brushes here. These are liner brushes. I prefer these to spotters because these long bristles, they hold a lot of water, a lot of pigment, but yet keep the fine edge. This is, again, American Painter, one of the more economical priced of the liner brushes. We've got kind of a mid-range brush here. It is a Winsor Newton. This falls about halfway in between price-wise to the American Painter and this, the real deal, the Winsor Newton. Series 7 Kolinsky Sable. You can see there's a lot of paint on the handle here. It's been used a lot because I use all these other brushes, that grunt work, the rough, down and dirty stuff. This really is saved for just the finest finishing touches. With the brushes covered, last thing I want to talk about is this palette. It's a disposable palette. Comes in a pad like this. It's a decent size, 9 by 12. It's got 40 sheets in it. And the surface is very nice. It's very resistant. Keeps your paint nice and wet. But when you're done for the day, for your session, you want to clean up. You just take the sheet, tear it off, you throw it away. It really doesn't get much easier than that for your cleanup. Now we've talked about the paint, the brushes, the palette, the miniature. I want to do a little bit of kind of a color theory exercise with you and just talk about this thing with the warm, the cool, the high saturation, the gray down. Just throw that out there before we start to work on the miniature itself. Put a few colors out on the palette to demonstrate a few little concepts here. I do a few kind of swatches of color. I'm going to start with, this is the leather brown. Now let's see what happens when we take some of the khaki, which is still essentially a yellow color. And I'm going to do kind of a from darkest to lightest, like so. And this way you can kind of compare these to a few other mixes. So this is going to look, when I do the next one, it's going to look slightly more gray. Let's do another right here next to it. This is the Rucksack Tan. All we did was just change one of the colors, and right away, dramatic difference. The value is about the same. This is just about as light as the khaki was. But you can see color temperature wise, this is cooler than this. This is also more gray down. There's a little more white in here. So without white, a little more intensity. I try another little swatch here. This time it's going to be Vomit Brown, which is even more intense, more almost a yellowish red, a little more orangey. And you can see the difference this makes. So we're kind of marching more and more towards yellow. So each of these kind of increases in intensity. This is all the same. It's kind of your anchor point here. We're changing along this end. Let's do one more set over here. And this time, we're going to go into that the ice yellow. So I'm going to set this up over here. And now create a transition. And maybe you would find it helpful to do some of these exercises yourself. Maybe as you're thinking about, well, what colors do I want for the miniature? Well, you can do some tests just like this. Now this yellow is more transparent. That's another thing you always have to factor in. I know that's a lot of people's frustration with yellows, is that they are very transparent. Which is why this miniature has been primed white and not black. So just about complete with our little light to dark right there. So see, this is all the same, and look at how this just increases. All of a sudden, each step, what we did, what we had was less and less intense. More gray down, less gray, pretty much full intensity yellow by the time we get here. Now what happens when we put some of the ivory into the yellow? You can see it even increases somewhat in intensity. What happens if we take some of that vomit brown and then start to put some of the yellow in there? Look at how it brings out the orange and intensity of the vomit brown. So you can recognize some of these two, say in the feathers, you see that a lot, and some of the vomit brown and the transitions on the cloak and on the leaves. So this is, I guess, when people think of yellow, they probably think of this. Or some of the GW yellows. This is what they think of is right here. That's yellow. Well, actually all this other stuff's yellow too. Even brown is a yellow, because it's certainly not in the green family, it's certainly not in the blues. It's a little bit towards the red, basically red and green together make brown. Yellow is one of the primaries. So what we're doing is we're kind of mixing in some of the other primaries with it. Some of the red, some of the blue. Obviously in this case more of the red. So hopefully this little chart here, this little catalog of color variations is helpful. Now one of the colors that I'm using on the base, and there's kind of a reason for this, is this, I'll be using this Imperial purple here. And I'm going to tone it down with a little brown. I'm going to put some of this right next to some of these other colors here. Because this usually makes a very nice complement to the yellow, where the blue really contrasts with it. So that's why we're using purple on the base, because you know this, it sets off all these different shades and tones of yellow. And again, we go from gray to more and more intense. We're working in intensity down the scale here. And then finally, and your complementary color, but one that's not too intense. So look at how nice those two go together. So one of the reasons I film this is so that you have this as a guide. You can maybe consult this, even freeze this on the screen, whatever. So you can, but you can also do a little color chart like this. I used to have to do dozens of these in school. Hated it. But now it's kind of helpful. So armed with this color chart here, it's time to start working on our miniature. I'm going to use the colors that we had out on the palette for painting the base, for that little exercise. Got this magnetized. I got a piece of sheet metal on this empty paint jar. I'm going to actually secure it even more with some blue tack. Just like I did on the swatches. Get some of that imperial purple. And let's get this so you can see it. I'm going to paint around the leaves. Leave those exposed. These leaves are from Woodland Scenics. They're really very fragile. They're, gosh, the consistency of like a tissue. I know there's brass etched leaves. I've been having a hard time getting a hold of some of that. Eventually I might get some, try it out. But these aren't too bad. These are maple leaves. I think they also make oak leaves. But the principle is the same. You're going to have to paint your brass etched leaves just like I'm painting these. So you pretty much got the area around the leaves covered. I'm going to shift to a somewhat smaller brush. What I want to do is think about, okay, what color do I want on these leaves? I can go a number of different directions. I can go with the tan. I can go with the rucksack tan. I can also even create a different tan by mixing. Just mix that ice yellow with the brown. All of a sudden we have something that's really close to that tan. I actually like to mix a lot of colors. Don't necessarily want to have 2,000 colors out on the palette. This right here is a little bit on the dead side. So I'm going to stick with the rucksack tan, and I'm going to start somewhat lighter. I want to have some of this vomit brown handy as well. So I'm going to stir that up. So a little yellow there. So I have some more intense leaf color and some that's a little less intense. So again, more saturated here, less saturated here. Pick out a few of these leaves. You won't really see a whole lot of difference when I put this down. The leaves, they come in yellow, but they kind of assume whatever color is underneath it because they're really super translucent. And let's put down, let's get a more intense color in here. So now as those dry, I'm gonna bring out some of the brown liner, the Reaper brown liner here. Get that out on the palette. And I'm gonna grab one of the washes you're gonna see me use. This is Agrax Earthshade. I'll throw this out on the palette too. And use these two kind of in concert, like so. Just like we brought out the leaves on the top surface by painting the dark around them, I'm going to do the same thing, only this time much more transparently. I just want to do this while we're waiting for the other stuff to dry. You're going to also see a lot of this glazing technique when it comes to painting the miniature. It kind of comes in after the shaded base coat. There's a little bit of a preview, and you can see how in some cases I even take it away with my finger. And what's important about this base is that it creates an environment, sets a context for the miniature itself. There we go. Very quickly. That pretty much establishes all the darks around the leaves. Now on the leaves themselves, we want to do some of these veins. I'm going to pick some of the leaves on the top. Take some of this brown, mix it with the vomit brown. Get this closer so you can see it. And just start to indicate some of the veins on this leaf. Over here. This one. Might even take some of the purple. Mix that in as well. Darken the veins of the leaves down a little more. Rotate this around. So these leaves. Don't want to forget this guy over here. Can even throw in some of the brown liner to, in effect, make a bit of a shadow underneath the leaf on your marble there, or stone, whatever it may happen to be. Tiny bit of a shadow there. Mix in some of the brown. That's about as dark as we want to make those veins. We can go in the other direction. Let's take some of the deep yellow, mix that with a little bit of the ice yellow, and throw a little bit of a highlight on the ends of these leaves. So what I've done here, this is another little sort of a microcosm of the miniature. So this is on all of these color theory, like the blue and the red. That's why the base plays an important part in it, because it sort of shows you what we're going to do on the miniature itself. So that just about, that's going to pretty much conclude our work on the base. So that's all done, ready to go, and the miniature is finished.